Hello and welcome back to Crafted by Corie. If you're new, I'm Corie. Welcome to my channel. If you're returning, thank you as always for being here. You mean the world to me. I cannot say that enough. I have some brand new fall DIYs, so let's go ahead and get right on into the crafting. DIY number one. All right, I have a few different colors of yarn from Michaels, and then this is something I got on Amazon. It's like a paper wrapped wire is the best way that I can describe it. And then I was showing you a skewer. You can also use a dowel, whatever is going to make you happy. You could go out in your backyard and get a nice looking stick off of a tree. You know, if you have some, I have sticks all over the ground in my yard from just dead wood that's fallen off of the trees. That's an option too. I just would make sure that I clean it, whatever. But I have taken 3 equal lengths of the paper wrapped wire, and I'm going to make a tiny loop at the bottom and a larger loop at the top of each of them. And I'm going to do this the same way on all 3 of them. I just eyeballed it. I did not measure it. I would say that from the bottom to the top of the bottom of this, okay, so from the bottom of the bottom loop to the bottom of the top loop, I think I measured that to be around 8 inches. You can make these whatever length you want. I eyeballed it. That looked like a good length to me for the project and my vision, but you do you. This is all just for inspiration. You don't have to use the same colors. You can use a different kind of yarn, whatever makes you happy. But I just made sure I got them all exactly the same length. Again, just eyeballed it completely. You saw what I did. And I'm going to start on one of these skeins of yarn. Now, if you're not familiar with how yarn works, you do want to look for that. You might have seen that I pulled it from the inside, at the bottom there, right? So if you pull the yarn out that way and pull from the center of the skein as opposed to the outside edge of the yarn, you are going to have a much easier time with the yarn. So you might have seen that I started trying to measure the yarn, and then I decided, you know what, it was going to be easier for me to just wrap it around something. Now, I just happen to have this box sitting on my craft table, so this is what I used, but you could use a piece of cardboard, whatever else. This was measuring it to be about 12 to 14 inches, and I'm going to be cutting them all in half. I did find that it was a little bit longer than what I needed it to be, and I ended up trimming off a lot more of the yarn than was necessary. So I did end up using the box the other way around, the smaller way around, for the next couple of yarn colors. But again, if you just have a piece of cardboard or something that's going to allow you to cut the yarn to, I would say probably 10 inches is a good length. But again, and sorry, Sammy's hanging out here with me, so you're probably hearing his chain rattle, but his collar rather, but that'll work. So I'm folding these in half, and I'm just drawing it up through the loop. So just kind of knotting them on here. Now I did that first one anchored. That's why I have that bottom loop, because I want to make sure that these aren't going to end up sliding down off of my piece. So I did end up creating another, like a knot on that, just to make it a little bit larger to avoid things sliding down over. I did consider putting these first 2 knots also through the center, but then I figured it might create a gap. I didn't want that gap there, so that's why I did it the way I did it. Now I'm just alternating them, right? And I'm going to do the same thing all the way up the length of my wire until I get close to the bottom of that top loop. So I'm just alternating it. So putting the loop on one side and pulling it, and whichever side I have my tails hanging out on, that's the side I want my tails to start on for the next one. So I've got the tails facing the same way. Oh, I flipped it. The loop is going to go the other way, and then when I pull it through, it's going to end up on the opposite side. So that was the way that I kept reminding myself which side that I needed to start on. So I'm not going to put you through all of that, but you can see as I work my way up, This is how I came along. Now, I had not cut quite enough of the yarn at first. I ended up having to go back and cut some more, which I did. And then when I was ready to finish this off, I wanted to put some beads at the top of this. This was inspired by something that I saw online, as are most of my projects these days. But I've got these little wood beads that I've had in my stash, and I'm going to slide 3 of them down over that paper wrapped wire. So just getting those secured on there. And then I am going to be trimming the edges to give this some shape. What I was starting to say, I did find that I needed about 10, and this is worsted weight ribbon, by the way. I needed about 10 of my little strands knotted to create 1 inch. And I did have this go for about 8 inches. So I needed 80 strands. So that's what I ended up doing for the other 2. I just did 80, actually I did 40 loops around my box, which I then cut in half to end up with 80 strands. So now, as you can see, I am just trimming off the excess yarn to give this a little bit of shape. So when you're tying it onto the piece, you want it roughly to be in half, but it doesn't have to be perfect because you are going to end up trimming off the yarn. So if the ends aren't perfectly lined up, if they're off 1/4 inch, it's really not going to matter, right? So I do end up trimming this one a little bit more on the right side because I felt like I had done that a little bit more uneven than I would have liked. What I found was once I cut the right side, instead of going through and trying to cut the left side, I flipped it over and I cut the right side again. Does that make sense? So I cut the right side, turned it over, so the uncut side was now on the right, and then I cut the right side again, and that worked out for me much better. And here are the 3 of them done. I did all of them the same exact way. And I also found that I liked the back side of it better than the front side of it. So my back side, after having done that, became my front. So now I cut off 2 more lengths of the paper wire stuff. And one at a time, I'm going to find the center there. I kind of folded it in half a little bit so that I would have my center spot. And I'm going to fold down the ends to that spot, kind of creating a heart shape. And I'm going to be using my jute twine on this. So I did the same thing with both of these, and I took the ends and just kind of wrapped them under, like I bent them under that point to just kind of keep it attached so it wouldn't come undone. So now I'm just creating a slip knot. You don't necessarily have to do a slip knot. I just for some reason decided that that was the way I was going to do it to make sure I got it nice and tight on here. You could totally just tie it around the base. I probably made it more difficult than it needed to be. But I pulled out a length of my jute cord that I'm now going to wrap up because I'm going to need to be able to get all of this through those loops, so that I've created with the wire, and that giant spool of jute is not going to work. So I'm opening up my slip knot. I'm wrapping it through there. I'm tucking this all through. Like I said, you could just tie it, all right? Just tie it on there, but leave yourself a decent size tail when you do tie it. Here, I'm just like on the struggle bus with my slip knot because I kept pulling it the wrong way. I get there eventually, you guys. But leave yourself a tail because you're going to be able to tuck that in and just wrap around it. And if you have too short of a tail, you're not going to be able to hide it and cover it up. So I left a tail of probably 2 or 3 inches. And now I am going to start wrapping this up through the middle. And you can probably see there, the tail is there, and I'm going to catch that with the yarn. So I'm just wrapping the jute around, I'm wrapping the jute around not just the wire in the middle, but also that tail. And once I get to the top of where it splits, and I'm taking it up as pretty much as far as I can go without making my wire loops too wide. or too narrow. You just got to eyeball it, guys, and figure out how wide or narrow you want it to be. But once I decided that I'd gone up far enough, I went ahead and wrapped the outer edge all the way around. And once I had that wrapped, I'm going to take it back and forth from the outer edge to the middle edge. And I'm wrapping it, making sure I'm going all the way around each side, at least one full circle, so that it anchors it and it doesn't slide down. So I'm not just wrapping it around the edge and going back. I'm wrapping it around the edge and then wrapping it around that same piece again. Hopefully this is making sense. Before I then take it back to the outer edge or back to the inner edge. Hopefully that makes sense. So essentially you have 2 strands for each spot. So you're kind of layering it. You'll be able to see it a little bit better in a minute. But I did the same thing on both of the pieces. I went down one side, I worked my way back up the other. And so here I'm at the end and I'm going to tie it off in the middle. I just brought it back to the middle and I'm going to tie that off. And then I'm going to add some more of my little beads. Now I've got a piece of wire here. It's just like floral wire. And I put my beads on there and then I used it kind of like a needle threader. So I put my jute through there because this jute is relatively thick. I wasn't sure if it was going to go double through the beads. I didn't know if the beads, the holes through the beads were going to be wide enough. So this was my way of getting this threaded onto the jute. And it actually worked out pretty well. And then I just anchored the base of my jute at the top of my piece with some hot glue. And then I just slid the beads all the way down to cover that up because I wanted to have a loop to hang these at the top. So hopefully that makes sense. Here you saw me thread it through. I've got it in there. I'm going to pull my beads on, putting that wire to the side because I don't need it anymore. Just trying to get my end lined up with and I just use a tiny little bit of hot glue there, you guys. You don't need a lot with the jute. Just making sure that it's anchored. So I've got my loop and pulling my beads down to cover that up. All right, and I just had made sure that my loops were going to be the same size. So now I am ready to add everything onto my piece. So I don't know if you caught that. When you want to try to anchor things on with loops, if you have a loop that's really big, you could just flip your piece through that loop, kind of like what we were doing to create our feathers. But when you don't have that luxury, you're going to bend it forward and to create loops on either side, and then bend your loops back, and it does the same exact thing. All right, I don't know if that makes sense. And you can pull it on there or slide it on, but I'm going to show you again in a second. So you bend it forward and then flip the loops back, and then you can slide it on there, and then you can tighten it. I love being able to do that because you don't always have the luxury of being able to put your piece through the loop that you've created because your loop isn't always big enough, right? So I just did that, alternating these, did it with every single one of them, bent it forward, flipped my loops back. There we go. And that is that. I'm just making sure they're all lined up and looking the way that I want. And then I am going to create a hanger for it with some more jute cord. I have a piece that I had cut off from having created those little leaf pieces. So I'm using a piece of that. I am creating a slip knot again. I guess I figured that was going to be the best way to get it as tight as I wanted it. I'm trimming that tail off all the way down to the knot and then adding a little bit of hot glue to secure it. Again, not a lot of hot glue. I don't want it to be super visible. Well, I don't want it to be really visible at all. So it was just enough to anchor it. And then I am going to add a little bit of glue to the dowel on either side so that my hanger doesn't go sliding off of my dowel, or in this case, my Dollar Tree skewer. So this was a really inexpensive way to make some cute fall decor, and I hope you like it as much as I do. DIY number 2. All right, this is a really old bag, and by old, I mean like 30 plus years old. I think I was in high school or college when my sister and I think I must have been in high school, we got into embossing, and Kim found this in her stash just a few weeks ago and asked if I wanted it, and I was like, yeah, let me try that. And we actually went to Michael's and found, because I was curious, is embossing still a thing with this embossing powder? And you know what? We found new. So I went ahead and got some of these stamps and some of these stamp pads and some more embossing powder because I wasn't sure if the older stuff was still going to work. Spoiler alert, yes, it actually does still work, and I'm going to use that in a second too. But I have this Dollar Tree ceramic piece, and I had always done the embossing powder on paper. So I didn't know, I wanted to see if it was going to work on something like this. And you know what? It did. It actually worked. Now, my execution on this piece, I'm actually going to call this project in particular a fail. Now, I am going to do something else with paper in a moment, but the reason I'm going to call this a fail is because I ended up using, I'm going to do another stamp here. The stamps were great, right? The stamps worked out really well. They embossed beautifully on here. It was perfect. So I could stamp with this all day long. What I was not pleased with for myself is I tried to use a marker, an embossing marker, but it was clear, right? And so I could not see it on here. And I think it probably beaded up a little bit because of this being ceramic and glossy. But at any rate, I didn't like the way the hand lettering turned out, so I just wasn't happy with it. Now, if you are great at hand lettering and on slick surfaces, you will love this. Have at it all day long. I'm just using a little teeny paintbrush also to dust away some of the extra embossing powder before I use my heat gun on it. If you're not familiar with embossing powder, essentially, and you've watched me do this now, but you put your stamp on your piece, and while it is still wet, you sprinkle it with this powder that when you use your heat gun on it, it melts it onto the piece and creates like a glossy embossed image, right? So wherever you put that powder, it's going to create this embossed effect. I love it. I think it's really cool. But here you can see me using one of these clear markers. Now, if I had used a color marker, that might have worked better because I would have been able to see what I was doing. But yeah, I used the clear with this brick colored embossing powder. And yeah, so you'll see in a second. I just wasn't super thrilled with it. The other thing I found, I think it must have been static electricity. It was keeping the embossing powder on this ceramic piece, which is why I was having to use the paintbrush. I don't tend to have the same issue when I'm using paper. Okay, so there's a little bit more work involved if you are using a glossy piece like this, because it just tends to cling, not just to the wet part where your stamp or your marker was used, but to like the whole thing. So I went ahead and just continued to get that cleaned up a bit, and then I'll be ready to emboss it. I didn't feel like I was able to get all of the little dots off between the letters, which also, in my opinion, made it look a little bit messy. So I wasn't thrilled with that either. So here you can see, yeah, the handwriting on here, or not handwriting, the hand lettering on here, I just wasn't pleased with the way that it looked because I couldn't see it when I was doing it, right? Or I clearly would have would have fixed it. But I'm just going to go ahead. I decided to go ahead and finish the job on the embossing. But again, just not super thrilled with it. So then I thought, well, what if I used a stencil? And so I grabbed one of my little stencils. This is on the back side of the same piece. I figured, you know what? I've already messed this one up. I might as well just stick with it and use it as my test case, right? So I thought, okay, well, what if I used a stencil? And then I was trying to decide if I would use the clear marker again, or if I would try chalk paint. Now, I think had I used the clear marker, I was a little afraid that it might run a little bit underneath. I'm not sure if it would have or not, but had I used the clear marker, this might have, and you can see I'm starting to do that, and then I thought better of it. I think it might have actually worked out better. So I'm going to have to test that again in the future, but I decided to use chalk paint, and so I'm just dabbing all of this on. Now, had I used a regular acrylic paint, this might also have worked out a little bit better, or another type of paint that doesn't dry quite as quickly, because in the time that I got my paint put away and peeled off my stencil, I mean, I'm not dilly-dallying here, you guys, but my paint largely had dried at this point, and so trying to get it to stick, getting the embossing powder to stick, it was interesting. It was almost like it was sticking to everything but the letters. And again, I think it's because of that static. You can see it's almost like it doesn't want to adhere to the paint. So chalk paint, no. The chalk paint, it's not going to work on chalk paint for the most part. There was an area in the middle where it actually did adhere, but on the ends, it was like, nope, I'm not sticking. I don't need to stick for you. So you can see I've got just a little of it sticking there in the middle. So again, just to finish the experiment, I did go ahead and use my heat gun on it to see how it would emboss up for the part that did stick. So again, I think if the paint had still been wet, it probably would have been okay. It would have worked, but this, in my opinion, was a little bit of a fail on my part. It was operator error for sure. Now, that wet look set of markers there to my left, those we had bought at the same time as that embossing powder. So those markers are 30, 35 years old, probably 35 years old. I was not expecting them to be anything but dried out. I was shocked that they are still perfectly good, as good as the day that we bought them. But at any rate, I have this little piece of paper that came in a pack from the Dollar Tree of all different colors, shapes, whatever. And I've got my gold embossing powder from back in the day. I grabbed out one of these markers. I was trying to decide if I should use this color. I think that was just like a black, but I ended up pulling out the green. I'm like, yeah, we'll try this. You're going to see that when I do it on here, it's not looking like a dark green, but I can see it, right? First of all, it's on the paper, so that helps with the visibility. Because you can see where the wet areas are. But I am just drawing a pumpkin, and this is going to be so super simple, right? Now I'm using my gold embossing powder and covering that all up, and then I'm just going to shake it right off back into my little margarine container. I don't even know if these containers are still like used today, but clearly we used to save them to use for our craft supplies. So I did use my little paintbrush a little bit to dust away some of the excess, but you can see not nearly as much stuff going on there as we had on the ceramic piece. I decided to add a little bit of a little twirly gig thingy there. Gonna go ahead and get that covered too. This worked so well. I just was very excited. So you can make cards with the embossing stuff, you know, whatever kind of stamp you have, you can make it embossed, right? I just think it's so fun. And it's neat to watch it do its thing with the heat gun. And this is the heat gun that we bought 35 years ago too, for this project. But, and when I started crafting, we had been looking for it, and Kim had it put away somewhere, and we just thought, well, maybe we'd given it away with the crafting supplies a while back. But lo and behold, she found it all. So I figured, you know what? This has a little pointy nozzle on it. I decided I was going to use it there. And then I just used my heat mat underneath it so that I'm not just doing it directly on my craft table because, you know. But yeah, just getting that all nicely embossed. And I'm going to show you a close up in the reveal picture here in a second. So you're going to be able to see how neat it looks. I don't have the ability to zoom in real well on my filming camera for some reason, but I just attached it to a Dollar Tree frame, and here you go. DIY number 3. All right, this is something I designed in Canva. It is available in my stand store if you would like. All of those individual leaves are part of that design in the bottom, by the way. I just used them all over this sheet because I didn't want to waste my sublimation paper. I figured I could use them for other things. I thought I was going to use them on this project, and then I realized that I just honestly didn't have enough space because of the size of my heat press that I'm going to be showing off. HTV Ront has sent me a brand new heat press that we're going to use today on this pillow. But if you're interested in this design, again, it is available in my stand store, and you can go on out and grab it there. There is a link in my description box. And I've got all kinds of designs out there too. So if you're looking for something for your projects, you can find it there. Now, I forgot to turn my camera back on for this next, well, not the next, but the next section. So you're going to see, I'm going to be talking a little bit about it in advance. I am going to go ahead and roller this with my lint roller to get little specks of whatever off of it. Really important to do that. I'm going to end up pressing it with my heat press to get these creases out. And then I'm going to prep it with butcher paper on the inside. And I'm going to use heat resistant tape on the to adhere my images on the top of it. And then I'm going to use some more butcher paper. Now this is the heat press. I am getting it set up for the first time, trying to feed the wire, the plug for the outlet through the bottom because you got to keep it away from the heat plate. And then that other wire on the side is for the little control box that you use to adjust the temperature and the amount of time that you're going to press for. It's got a little timer on it and a temperature thing. I am going to turn that little knob up to get it to 390 degrees and 40 seconds for the amount of time. That's per the instructions that HTV Ront provided. And so as I mentioned before, while I forgot to turn on the camera, that's my heat resistant tape. I've got everything on there. I do have the butcher paper inside the pillow. I'm adding more butcher paper to the outside. I'm showing you the butcher paper in there. And now I am ready to go ahead and get this pressed. So I've got this open. I'm flipping it to the side, being very careful because it is 390 degrees. And I'm going to go ahead and press this for 40 seconds. Through the magic of video editing, I am able to not make you wait for 40 seconds. So this is called a hot peel for this pillowcase. You do want to just go ahead and remove it right away while it's still hot. And look at how nice this turned out, you guys. This is awesome. I'm going to be giving it to my daughter for her new apartment. The only thing I would have done is put the letters and the image closer to each other. That's the only thing that I wasn't super happy with myself about, but this heat press worked great. DIY number 4. Okay, I have my little Arteza wood rounds here. I'm going to grab 3 of them out and we're going to make a little shelf sitter pumpkin. I love how this turned out. It is super simple, but I think super sweet. So I'm just trying to position them. I'm trying to be strategic in the way that I have them positioned because I want to hide the holes on the back too. The front one, I'm going to end up filling that hole in, but I'm also trying to figure out the best way to position them for them to sit up properly when we're done here. So I've gotten them where I want them, and then I'm going to try and glue them together. Now I have some Star Bond, it's a thick Star Bond instant glue, super glue, I guess you'd call it, that I was going to use. I ended up struggling a little bit with it in getting the wood rounds to stick together, so I did end up supplementing it with hot glue. There's my Star Bond. But it also works great as a filler, so I am going to use it to fill in that hole that I still have that's visible right now. If I had had wood putty or, oh, you know what? I think I do have wood putty and I forgot about it. But I was going to say if I had spackle or wood putty, I would have used that instead. Yeah, I just remembered that I do have wood putty somewhere, but I'm out of spackle. So if you have spackle or wood putty and want to use that instead, absolutely, especially if you are planning on using or keeping this like a wood tone. You're not going to want to use the glue in there. You're going to want to use probably the wood putty because that's going to blend the most. I'm just using the activator spray there, trying to get it to set up faster. And so it worked great for filling in that hole, but like I said, not so great for the attaching. And I don't know if it's because I was using it wrong or if I was using too much of it or what. I tried even the activator spray, just trying to be careful because I don't want it to not be able to sit upright if I get it wrong. The activator spray did get the left side to adhere, but the right side, I was still struggling with it. And so rather than messing with it some more, I just used some hot glue and went ahead and got her done. So now that my piece is together, I am going to grab my pumpkin chalk paint. At least I think that's what I did next. Oh, nope. I went ahead and I sanded that down a little bit just to make sure that it wasn't, that it was all the same height, you know, that I hadn't gone up too high on the filler. So now I've got my pumpkin chalk paint and I'm just going to go ahead and give this a coat of paint. I think I gave the middle one an extra coat because I wanted to make sure that that little spot that I'd filled in wasn't visible again. And I am being careful to stay away from the edges of the pumpkin. I thought that the little bark was kind of cool and rustic looking, and so I wanted to preserve that. So I did not paint the edges. I'm only painting the face of these little wood rounds. So just being careful around those edges. And then what I did was I went into my stash to grab, I actually have a stick in my stash, and then also little birchwood pieces that I had picked up from the Dollar Tree. And I was trying to decide which one I would like better. I knew that birch piece was really thick, which is why I grabbed the stick, but I actually ended up liking the way that the birch piece looked better than the stick. So, but it was white, right? Or like an off-white. So I wanted it to more match the edges of my pumpkin pieces. So I got my Java chalk paint out, but Java's having an issue. Java started drying up and had separated before it started drying up. So the colors, I don't know. I worked on it for a little bit and then I was like, you know what? It's going to be good enough. I need to get some more Java. But I'm using a baby wipe because I didn't want this to be a full-on paint situation. I just wanted to stain essentially the birch piece so that it was going to match closer to the pumpkin edges. And it actually worked out really well. So once I had that done, I'm ready to go ahead and attach it to the top of my pumpkin. So I'm just figuring out the angle because with all of this, and sorry, I'm off screen here, but I added a bunch of hot glue underneath the base of the stem. You're going to see here in a second. So it's kind of below the circles, but above the stem in that little gap. That's where I put all the glue, and I'm adding some more to the sides of it. So those 3 little areas are where I glued my stem. And she's sitting up real pretty, no problem. Now I'm going to take some more of that paper wrapped wire, and I'm going to cut off a length of it. This is probably 18 inches if I had to guess, but you do you, whatever length you think is going to work. I'm just wrapping it around my fingers a little bit to create a curly Q. Sorry, I'm off camera. I get into my crafting, you guys, and I don't tend to think to look up to make sure that I'm still, sometimes I do, but sometimes I forget to look up and make sure that I'm still on screen. So I apologize, but gonna just cut that in half. I was gonna wrap it around the stem, and then I didn't like the way that looked, so I cut it in half, and I'm tucking it into the hot glue that is still was still cooling somewhat. I was able to get it in there really well on the left side. The right side I was struggling a little bit, so I am gonna add a little bit more hot glue just to make sure that it's secure. And this little guy is done. She turned out so cute. I absolutely love her, and she is going to be going to Elena's home as well. But let me know what you think. Okay, everybody, that's it for today. If you enjoyed the projects, please remember to give me a big thumbs up, leave me a comment, let me know which one was your favorite. And until the next time, be well, be kind, and make it a great day. Thank you so much for watching. Take good care. Bye.